Well, the new DC pension freedoms are a real game changer for the world of DC pensions and their members and the schemes that run them. All the opportunities and choice that members now have come with increased risk and complexity and also cruciality as well, because this is often the last pot of money somebody will have and they need to make it last for a considerably long period of time. So what schemes are now really wrestling with is how much of the freedoms do they make available to their members and how do they make them available, and perhaps more importantly, how they communicate and engage with their members about the new pension freedoms. Now, I struggle to see why many schemes would want to make drawdown available on the back of their schemes. The risk and the burden that comes with that seems excessive, given there's already an efficient market out there doing that. So I think the real focus for schemes and trustees to look at is how they engage their members, how they empower their members to make effective decisions, particularly in the pre-retirement phase, and also how they help to transition their members across from the DC scheme to whatever implemented strategy is going to be used, whether that be drawdown, annuity, or a combination of both. Where schemes really have a difficult time with this is a scheme will know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. So for example, a scheme will know how much is in somebody's fund, how old they are and when they're going to retire. But what they're unlikely to know is if they have dependents, if they have other pensions, if they have debt, if they have other investments, what their attitude to risk is. And because the new freedoms require a more personalised approach, this is going to be really challenging for schemes to help engage their members and give them the support they need to make the right decisions. Well, unfortunately, under the new pension freedoms, there are a lot of opportunities for members to get poor outcomes. And if we ignore the obvious, that not saving enough or falling foul of one of the pension scams, and just look at how DC schemes and the decumulation process could cause poor outcomes. And for me, the biggest risk of a poor outcome is for somebody being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what I specifically mean about that is having the wrong investments at the point at which they're going to retire or take benefits. So, for example, if you have somebody who is going to use a drawdown approach, who's in a traditional de-risking lifestyle strategy, they're heading in completely the wrong direction for where they need to be, and they're likely to get a poor outcome. Conversely, if you have somebody who's targeting a drawdown outcome but isn't in the position to take that risk, or isn't willing to take the risk that drawdown entails, then again they're heading in the wrong direction and they're going to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, what that invariably means, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, is that somebody's either going to be taking too much risk or they will have missed out on investment opportunities during that period, either of which will potentially result in a financial loss to that member. And what worries me is at what point does a member suffer that financial loss and where do they go to seek redress? Is it to the trustee? Is it to the scheme? Who's given them the information on which they made that decision? It's easy to see why schemes would look at changing their default option given the new pension freedoms, because so few people are now taking the annuity route, which most schemes historically has been their default option. And they're now looking at putting in drawdown options perhaps as the default. Now, I've got a few concerns with that. I very much see the default option as being the option for those people that won't engage, make a proactive decision about what they're trying to achieve with their retirement income and retirement objectives. By having drawdown as your default option, I very much see that as you're committing somebody to continuing in investment risk sort of background or an environment that's still going to be invested in the market. Whereas if you have a de-risking option, you're removing that investment risk. And I think without somebody making an active decision to keep them in risk, to force somebody into risk, to me feels slightly more aggressive and potentially more risky to the scheme and trustees to be pushing people down that route who aren't making an active decision. The real challenge for schemes and trustees is to get people to make active decisions and tailored decisions to what they're trying to achieve. And anybody who is going down drawdown as a default option really needs to help members identify where it's totally not appropriate and to get them out of that default into something more appropriate. If somebody is going to buy an annuity, a lifestyling strategy or a target date fund that de-risks it's crude, but it still works. And it still works as it worked and has worked for the previous 10, 15, 20 years. For somebody cashing out, a de-risking strategy is equally quite effective in terms of removing the investment risk. Where I have an issue with de-risking strategies, not de-risking or default strategies, is with drawdown. One size fits all doesn't work with drawdown. Drawdown is different to annuity and cashing out. Annuity and cashing out is a one-off transaction at the point of retirement, whereas drawdown is an ongoing process that lasts throughout or into retirement. And everyone will use drawdown very differently. So people have different needs for cash and income, people have different priorities, people have other pensions, other resources. So no two people will use drawdown the same. So to have a one-size-fits-all solution is incredibly risky and will inevitably lead to some poor outcomes for a lot of people adopting that approach. What we really need for drawdown is personalised glide paths that reflect somebody's needs, objectives, and what they're trying to achieve in retirement. Well, the main retirement plan, obviously accumulation is one of the major retirement planning stages, but we're here focusing on decumulation. And it's important to recognise that decumulation doesn't start when accumulation stops. Accumulation and decumulation will actually overlap. And the whole decumulation process should be an ongoing process. It's not a one-off event. And we need to move away from this fixation that decumulation happens at the point of retirement. If we do that, we're going to end up with a lot of people getting poor outcomes. Where decumulation starts is approximately, we reckon about 5 years from retirement. It can vary depending on what the scheme has in place. But if we say about 5 years from retirement, people need to start making key decisions. And at that point, if somebody can establish what the right income strategy is for their needs and objectives, and then work out how best to invest to achieve those objectives, they are then on the right path. But what's important to recognise is that things will change. So what might have been right 2 years ago, your personal circumstances might have changed, you might have inherited money, you might have decided to work longer, you might have decided to do a part-time job, you might have incurred some debt. Whatever it might be, your circumstances or the external markets might change. Just look what's happened in China recently. Things will change. So it's an ongoing process. It needs to be constantly monitored and adapted to reflect your changing needs and objectives as well as what's going on in the market. And if I might add, for those people who are using flexi-access solutions, the decumulation process will extend into the post-retirement world. And for many people, it might be, it's not a question of whether to annuitise, it's when to annuitise for a lot of people. The one thing you can't beat is longevity. Nobody knows how long you're going to be alive for. And the only way to protect against that is to have an annuity. And what we will see with the new freedoms is that people delay buying their annuity. They're not going to buy it at 60, 65, but at 70, 75, 80, the value of annuities will be significantly more compelling, and that's where more people should consider drawdown exit strategies. My simple answer to that is schemes aren't doing enough at the moment, but I think schemes recognise that as well, so I think that's positive. In fairness, the pension freedoms have only just been passed into law, and unlike auto-enrolment, there are no fixed deadlines or requirements about what a scheme has to do or should be doing. We know we're going to get a new DC code, which I think will just simplify and make it a bit more digestible for trustees and schemes to use. But I think it's not going to move away from the fact that they're looking for schemes and employers to try and help their employees maximise what's available to them under the pension options. As it stands, we have about 80-90% of people in DC schemes in default strategies. And the vast majority, 95 to 100% of those default strategies are de-risking annuity strategies. So we know we've got lots of people heading in the wrong direction and on track to achieve a poor outcome. I think where we need to be careful and where we need to do more is for those people within 5 years of retirement. They're getting very close to making a lot of, or they're already on track to start affecting their retirement outcome, and some of them are going to be heading in the wrong direction. We need to be getting in touch with those people quickly, informing them of what's going on, what their options are, and trying to put in corrective actions where people are heading in the wrong direction and provide reassurance to those that are heading in the correct direction. Okay, well, there are a host of things that schemes and trustees should be considering for their members to help them make better outcomes. I think with the new freedoms, we know a more personalised approach is required. And we know that members aren't all going to engage in the same way. So it's about providing a range of different engagement methods and means of people making active decisions. So we have a pyramid, we call it the pyramid of sort of like ever improving or adding more value and helping people to engage more of things a scheme can do that will help members achieve better outcomes. So at the very bottom of that pyramid, we have the fact that the scheme will need to articulate and communicate the new pension options and freedoms to their members, as well as inform them of PensionWise and what PensionWise can do for them. And moving into the second tier of the pyramid, schemes should also be looking to increase the number of options or decumulation options they make available to their members. So not just having one decumulation option that might be annuity, having an annuity option, a drawdown option, a cash out option. We know these have limitations, but at least they're giving people a bit more choice for those people that don't want to engage. Moving up to the next tier, it's about schemes and trustees providing more advice and guidance, whether it be tools or written information, particularly in the pre-retirement years, and perhaps even advice at the point of retirement, just to help people, again, get more information, make more informed decisions. But the real pinnacle of driving better outcomes, more personalised outcomes and tailored glide paths would be to give members, or the option for members, to take regulated advice in the pre-retirement years so that they can establish, well, what is the right strategy for them, and then how best to invest to achieve those needs, objectives that they're trying to achieve. By doing that, you'll get somebody on the right pathway and set up well to achieve the best outcome. Now, a lot of schemes and trustees, as soon as you mention regulated advice, it's, do we want to get involved in that? That's obviously cumbersome, there can be risk and so on and so forth. And this is where a scheme needs to partner with an expert. There are lots of FCA regulated bodies out there and providers out there who are willing to get involved, who have developed solutions to help the DC corporate market. And these are the people that trustees and schemes and members need to turn to help mitigate the risks, but fundamentally help their members achieve the best possible outcomes for their needs, objectives, and what they're trying to achieve. Guidance or advice, well, there's a question and a half. The layman in the street sees guidance and advice as one and the same. George Osborne, when he stood up at delivering his budget in 2014, talked about giving people access to advice, which has turned out to be guidance. But there is a fundamental difference between guidance and advice. Guidance, if you receive guidance, you have no regulatory protection whatsoever. If you follow on with the guidance that you're given, you're doing so at your own risk. Whereas if you receive regulated advice, you get the full regulatory protection through the Financial Ombudsman scheme. And therefore, if you're a trustee or a scheme or a member, surely there's more peace of mind and reassurance of having regulated advice rather than guidance. Now, for something to be regulated advice, there needs to be a personal recommendation. There has to be a look at somebody's needs and actually an investment recommendation made for that individual. So if you look at it in the context of a DC scheme, somebody would need to give advice on how to invest that person's assets within the DC scheme for it to become regulated advice. But there's no doubt that regulated advice solutions are going to be far more powerful in helping members to achieve better outcomes, but also helping trustees, schemes and members have that peace of mind that it's been dealt with by a specialist, and should it prove to be wrong, they have recourse at the highest possible level. Okay, well, how much to pay for regulated advice is the million-dollar question. I'll come back to that in a second. Let's just look at what types of advice are available. First of all, there's full advice. Now, that's the type of advice that I think we're all familiar with. And that's where an advisor will do a full fact find, look at all areas of financial need, and provide recommendations across the board. Quite a comprehensive and thorough process, and typically more expensive. And what the FCA have also made available is focused and simplified advice, where quite simply you're looking at a particular area of need of an individual. Now, the beauty with focused and simplified advice is they're not watered down in any way. So you're still getting advice delivered by a regulated expert. The advice still needs to be a personal recommendation based on that person's individual needs and circumstances. And most importantly, from a trustee, scheme and member perspective, it is the advice, you still get the full regulatory protection through the Financial Ombudsman scheme. So very, very powerful. So we look at an example of focused advice for a DC scheme member. For me to advise an individual on what is the right strategy for them to take and how best for them to invest, I would need to have a financial picture of what they have already. So if they have £50,000 in ISAs, or if they have a mortgage, or if they have rental income coming in from a property portfolio, we need to know those things, because that will affect how best you make use of your pension and how dependent you are on your pension scheme. But what I don't need to do with focused advice is advise you on what to do with those ISAs or what to do with that rental income or so on and so forth. I'm concentrating on giving you a specific recommendation on the DC scheme. Cost, and I did say I'd come back to cost. Offering focused and simplified advice is clearly not as intensive and as much work as full advice, and therefore the cost is significantly less. Now, ourselves and a number of other people in the regulated environment have come out with focused and simplified advice solutions that work, and I speak on behalf of ourselves. We've developed a solution delivered at £150 for the advice, which is quite affordable. But importantly, that £150 is actually designed to meet a HMRC allowance that exists. So an employer can pay for a member to have retirement pension advice, whereby it's not a P11D benefit to the employee, but it's still a legitimate business expense, provided it's within £150. Hence why we've priced at that point. Now, what we're saying to employers is, we recognise you've got other objectives and things to spend your money on. So a lot of employers might not want to fund £150 for those people that need advice, but even just making it available for employees to pay themselves, whether it be salary sacrifice or otherwise, is a fantastic benefit, because if a member went out to try and get that service themselves, they'd probably be looking at full advice, which might cost £500, £750 or £1,000. So I think it can be employer, can be employee funded, doesn't matter which. It's tremendous value for money in terms of helping people get the right outcome and giving them regulatory protection. Okay, well, schemes, trustees, employers want to find out more about how a focused, regulated advice solution can really help the scheme and their members to get better outcomes and more tailored and personalised outcomes, a better engagement. What I'd encourage them to do is have a look at our website, have a look at our Pathways solution, which is on there, and some of the tools that we host on the website. We can also do a very quick 30-minute online demonstration. The service is an online service, therefore very easy to demonstrate for the comfort of your office. And then you'll really start to see the power of how a regulated advice solution can help your members really get the best out of the new pension freedoms.